Do you want to sell commissions but you lack the confidence? The thought of someone paying you is exciting, but it's also nerve-wracking. You want to take them on, but you know your work isn't good enough yet. So in this video, I'm going to break down the full process to transform your flat, lifeless portraits into masterpieces so you can take on those commissions with confidence. By the way, I'm Adam and I've been drawing for over 25 years, and I help charcoal artists come off the grid method, master proportions, and implement suggestion in their work. Let's dive in. So when we look at this portrait, what do we see? What do we look at first before we jump straight into the drawing? Where do your eyes land on this portrait? For me, immediately my eyes land right here, across here, and we have this A-frame. As soon as I look at this portrait, this is what I see. This is my beginning stages of how I'm going to start the drawing. And I think the reason why this sticks out to me so much is because it's the most prominent areas that I see in the portrait anyway, because it's also surrounded by this whole area in here as well. We've got all of this information that we can now use to structure the rest of the face. If we have a look at the gap between the top of his hairline and then where his eyebrows are, we've got a landmark here, and then obviously we've got his tash coming through here as well. So if let's just get rid of this for a second. Amazing. So regardless of how funny this looks, if we have a look at what it's showing us, this is basically what you want to try and envision when you're working on the beginning stages. Sorry, that's absolutely cracked me up. So notice the distance from here is kind of similar to the distance here. It's a little bit shorter. And then say for instance, if you were to half this section in here, right? So then we've got this distance, 1, 2, this from here is about the same distance to here. So if you half this nose, you'll then get the distance from the bottom of his nose to where his lip is. So already before I even jump into the drawing, I'm trying to almost make a blueprint in my head with certain landmarks and how I'm going to navigate around the portrait. Now we have like a bit of a base structure going on in our head. What else do we see within the reference that we can almost absorb before we start going into the portrait? What about the values, the contrast? What is the portrait showing us? So we've got this nice checkerboard lighting that's coming through. Lighter value, darker value, lighter value, but darker areas, lighter value, darker value, lighter value, darker value. So we've got this consistent back and forth between a dark and a light value that falls all the way through the portrait, which is ideal because it means that when we come to approach it, we can use our darker values in a really kind of beneficial way to find our lighter values. Because it's such a balanced reference, we can use that to our advantage. And we've also got this prominent shadow coming across in here as well, which gives us the nice little triangle highlight in the cheek. Now when I took this reference, I just waited for about, I think it was like 5 o'clock in the evening. I waited for the sun just to kind of come down a little bit more so it was a bit softer. Had him stood at about a 45-degree angle against the sun, and it creates this really nice, almost looks like professional lighting, but it's just outside. I highly recommend that you go out and take your own photos as well, because then you can start creating 100% original work. It's one of the steps for you to be able to eventually develop your style. So when I work into this drawing, I've basically done the bare minimum in terms of structure, and almost immediately, as soon as I've got this A-frame in, I've started putting in some of that value in already. And that's because I decided not to do a full structure of the portrait at the beginning, because I wanted to start from the inside and work out. There are a few ways to draw a portrait. There's not just this one right way. In one of my previous videos, I got a handful of comments asking, why do I start from the inside and work out? What's the benefit of doing that instead of working from the outside in? One of the benefits of working from the inside out is it gives you that opportunity to have more freedom in exploring with the portrait. You get to experiment with what you want to do with the outer sections of the drawing. Not saying that you can't do that if you work from the outside in, it just gives you a bit more freedom if you work from the inside out. But the payoff to that is it's more difficult. You don't have as many connection points as you could do. And having those connection points is what makes that portrait a bit more digestible, a bit easier to handle. Inside my program, we take a deep dive in mastering the fundamentals so we can evolve past that and develop your own style. And style isn't just found, it's built. You can prep, you can do the right work beforehand and identify specific elements that you want to start implementing into your work. If you want to know more about my lifetime access program and working with me, I'll leave a link in the description to book a call. We'll talk about your struggles, talk about what you genuinely want to achieve with your work, and then whether or not my program and working with me is best for your goals. Link in the description. Now, because he has such a symmetrical face, it means that it's one of the more difficult portraits to do because there's less room for error. And you'll see in this video that I don't really capture him until like the very end of the drawing. I was in the ugly stage almost to the very end. Now notice I put a little bit of a value behind his head on this side instead of this side. He looks like Mickey Mouse now. And that's because, again, we're going back to that checkerboard lighting. Because we have this shadow here, so we've got a darker value, his whole face, if we scale out, is the lighter value, and then we've got the darker value in here. If we were to have that extra value coming this way, we would have this darker value, and then a darker value. It would become a lot more stiff, it would become a lot more rigid. The composition, it just wouldn't feel right. It would go against the grain of what the reference is showing us. Now, because I want all of the realism aspects in this part of his face, and I want more implied forms in the outer sides and then just complete empty space at the bottom, I'm working my way out of the portrait so I can balance all of those elements together. So much so, I don't actually add this section of his body in until way later into the drawing. Now, this portrait has really rich black or dark values going through his face. It's what helps create that balanced contrast value with that checkerboard lighting. However, I don't want to include all of those rich tones within the portrait. If I have this heavy black border going around the entire thing, it can almost feel like it's put up a wall against the portrait. But at the same time, I still need to include some of those rich values to give it that depth and that balanced contrast that the reference shows us. I don't want to do too much, but I also don't want to do too little. There's a fine balance. So I just want to border it here, here, and here. This helps bring all of your attention into the face, which is where most of the detail is going to be. It gives us that nice contrast that puts the depth into the portrait, while at the same time giving us that openness in the surrounding areas. And there was a lot of tinkering in the middle stages and the real soft and subtle transitions of values and tones that come through his features as well, which means you have to really get quite precise with how you're placing it. I'm balancing it out with the least amount of information I can put in to separate his hair from the background. I'm literally just putting one eraser mark through to give it that separation. And it's not until the very end stage that I now put in this part of his body. And just by doing that, I feel it gives it such a dynamic look. I think it just gives it such a nice balance, such a nice weight for the rest of the drawing. Your eye lands right in the middle, and then it becomes really easy on the outside of the drawing. And then it's just a case of adding those final little touches just to blend it through a little bit more. Again, because he has such a symmetrical face, I wanted it to be as soft and as transitional through the values as it could be. That open end look where you have your value, you have the face, and then you have that open end and it leads your eye coming all the way through is one of my favorite looks, and I think it suits this drawing really well. I'll see you in the next one.